Champ.
Rexanne Hossafrost.
Ray Murphy.
Dan Hughes.
Bruce Butcher. Scott Safford.
Jim Adderholt.
Jane Plummer.
Anita Saracita.
Megan Heil. Just making sure it also picked it up. All right, the first item for discussion, and really looking at these items, they're kind of married together in some way. And Councilwoman Hossafrost,
Thank you, Megan.
appreciate you all meeting with us.
Appreciate you.
Thank you. So early in the term. Took a long time.
And we do appreciate these meetings. Now it sounds like it's working now. That we all can get together and discuss and make sure that we're all continually throughout our terms on somewhat the same page and similar discussions. So I want to start with the first couple items, which is the side setbacks, which also kind of marries into the sunset plane, which were in your packets. And these are ideas. I also would like to say at the end of this meeting that we would like to come with some consensus to move these items forward. This is the second time they've been discussed amongst everyone at different times, but to give the town some direction so that we can start putting together some ideas and moving these items forward into motions and changes to our LDC. So you're going to hear a lot of, do we have a consensus? And so at this point, these are ideas and recommendations, and they're up for discussion. And the first one was the side setbacks. If you notice, we have side setbacks that, I gotta put my glasses on, vary between whether you, as you discovered today too, which are also in here, if you are based off the size of your lot, and also if you are water and not water, on a waterfront or not waterfront. So the idea was maybe that we look at this as a greater whole and say, okay, do we bring them down to one single standard? And one recommendation was to do a 10%. Joanne had a lot of input on this too as well, if she would like to make some comments. But the idea being is that those who have got the smaller lots would have a smaller side setback, and as you get larger, you have larger setbacks. This was also create what we were originally talking about, the view corridor out on Estero. So as those bigger lots, we wouldn't see as massive of a house, but we would see some more space between them, because they would have more of a 10% versus just a 7.5 foot side setback.
Jane hated this, didn't she?
Well,
I just know
first of
she and I have
I
argued
have a
about it for
comment
years.
since my name was thrown in. Since we have non-waterfront lots that have 5 foot existing, I think it would be a big change for all of those non-waterfront properties who have 5 foot setbacks to go to 7.5 or whatever. But the 5 isn't even on here, which is concerning to me, except on the Santos areas. And to take a percentage on the larger lots, or what people are, they may be buying 2 lots to build 1 house on or whatever, and then you're going to take 10% of that lot. I think you are reducing the value of our properties. And yes, you might get view corridor, but that doesn't mean to say that they can't plant it with plants and you can have view corridor anyway. So
That's where it has to go from there. That's where the discussion has to go from there.
And then you're creating a smaller box in which they can have, so we're going to have taller houses because we're creating a smaller box in which they can build.
Well, but that's where it marries into the next couple of items here that we were all talking about, and that is, how do we stop some of the massive boxes and massing of the buildings, but not limit as much as within reason, I guess, because you're always going to limit if the original plan was kind of the cake, oh, I got to sit forward, sorry, is the cake idea mentality where, you start at X, then for each level you come in, and yet you're going to reduce some of the sizing, but you're not going to make it unreasonable either. There's, as we had a discussion a couple of days ago with our town attorney, that as long as it's within reason, you're not saying so you build a $2 million house instead of a $5 million house on Estero or something of that sort.
You know what, Megan? I think that we should challenge ourselves not to think in terms of how can we stop the big box houses, because I had a conversation with someone who lives in one of those big houses, and he said to me, "What's wrong with my house? Why don't you want me as part of your community?" And I said, it wasn't that I don't like the house or not that I don't like you, but I'm looking at what I want this this boulevard and this community to look like 10 years from now. That's what my charge is. So I think if we talk about this in terms of what do we want our boulevard to look like, and what do we want our view corridors to be, and what do we want as opposed to what we don't want, I think it'll be a more productive conversation, because we won't be alienating anybody,
Well,
even though we are.
Good.
But
Thank
I
you.
just, if we think about it in those terms, I think it'll be more productive.
I think you also have to look at, when we built those design standards way back in 1995, when we were putting our thing together, we had these cute little cottages with big front porches where you'd have a rocking chair on the front porch, and you drive around to the side and have your garage going underneath that way so everybody didn't have to look at garages. Great idea, beautiful, nobody wants them. So I hope that we don't create a standard in which we don't have people that want to live in them.
I don't
Because
think that's possible.
you think that's possible?
I don't think that's possible.
I don't either.
Mm-mm.
I don't either. I think you could put a skull and crossbones and 2x2 houses on the bridge, and people would still come.
They do live under the bridge, but.
I think that the nature of our community is so desirable, such a desirable location, and I don't think this, Jane, this is an argument you and I have had for 25 years now. I don't think it's our job to think about what those people want. I think it's our job to think about what we want the community to be. And then if those people want to come here, we welcome them.
Madam Chairman, there's three members here that were here originally, Anita, myself, and Dan. And the idea back then was, with the view corridors, it didn't matter what kind of house was on there. We wanted to stay where we could still see and know that the Gulf of Mexico was still over there. That was the idea. And somehow it got away from that. But the idea is that you could still rebuild these houses and everything, and just build them up and maintain the view corridors in the sides from the setbacks and what have you. But those are no good if you allow every sort of landscaping in the world and fill in the basements and everything else that has transpired since then. So I agree with Anita. If our goal is still to maintain the view corridors, or encourage not more than encourage, but actually do it, then we have to tighten all those other options up, and if that's still our goal. If our goal is not to be Hickory Boulevard, now Hickory Boulevard is beautiful, but I used to drive down Hickory Boulevard and I knew the Gulf of Mexico was there every
And now you don't.
Now you don't.
20 yards, and now we don't even know it's over there. So we have to have a consensus about where we really want this to go, and then go from there.
And I think you reiterate why we're sitting here, is I guarantee everyone has got people who have asked about how to improve that they don't want to be like that down there. We still want to know there's water and sunshine on Estero, which are some of the limitations that you have as you drive south of here.
If I could just add to this, the thing I would say, it's not just about the view corridor, because they're building these very large houses on our side streets as well.
That's right.
And the impact on the neighborhood in many different ways has been quite detrimental.
Yeah.
So it's not just about, in my view anyway, it's not just about the view corridor. There
You
are
know what,
many, many
Roxanne?
other issues.
When we have when we have this conversation, and I'm sure we'll have it again, you should bring a photograph of your house. It's a perfect example of what transpires.
I now live in a canyon.
Mm-hmm.
When I go to out in my backyard, I see a wall. The entire one side of my house is just a big wall.
Yeah.
Well, you have the option to build up,
Have
so.
a 6-foot condo in Missouri, I get it.
Actually, my house is already non-conforming, too close to, if I would tear down and rebuild,
You'd be
yeah,
you'd be part of it.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with FEMA, so. But it seems like to me that we're chasing the horse that's already left the barn. If you go down Estero Boulevard, how many houses have a view corridor in them? 4, 3? I mean, I go up and down there. I don't see the water anywhere.
Oh, no, there's quite a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's quite a few
There's
that
quite a
still
lot.
do.
That are vacant lots.
Well, and
Vacant
even
lots
no,
on
not that are
Estero?
vacant
still
lots.
cottages and still smaller houses, still small. And I think there's a significantly more of the smaller still, so I don't necessarily, horse has somewhat left.
Yeah.
But I think that we still have the opportunity to save what's still there, and
But-
there's a considerable amount.
But some of the small houses have accessory houses or
They do.
cottages on the side. You can't see anything. I mean, at the end of your street where your house is on, what is it?
Hibiscus.
Hibiscus.
Hibiscus. That one building there is one of the few that I recognize when I go down the Estero Boulevard. I can actually see water because it's stilted up and you can see under it. But there's very few.
Well, that's the point, though. There's still, I think we're trying to say this, is other than the people living in those big houses, I don't think anybody drives down Estero and goes, wow, this is great, because it's not. And I know what's going to happen across the street from our house. There's going to be 2 big boxes, and I know it's part of change, but if we can all come together and figure out a way to make sure that those boxes aren't just big spaceships, there's actually some view corridors, or the wedding caking or
Yes.
massing or whatever. But I mean, what's happening right now, I think we all agree that it's not the way we want Estero Boulevard to look like.
We
And our side
never
streets now.
anticipated it.
This is not just about Estero Boulevard, as has been mentioned. However, it's every property in every neighborhood. So we're talking island-wide. I think that's imperative that we recognize that it's every property island-wide. People have a right to privacy, however, I think and to landscaping. I think for us to want structures on a barrier island without a lot of native landscaping and whatever is not a healthy attitude either. No one is going to build a house on Estero Boulevard or in any other neighborhood and not want some privacy in their yard. And I ask if you each think about your own yards and if you have a fence or if you have landscaping and the function that it serves for the quality of life on your piece of property. I don't think it's fair to say, oh, you can't landscape your property. It's not a healthy environmental point of view, and it's not a healthy quality of life point of view for someone's home. So I'm not in favor of regulating the landscape as a solution to the problem. I think we should be welcoming landscape as soft structure and healthy structure on the island. With regard to leaving the structures open underneath, no one has an inexpensive car anymore. So I'm not talking about an expensive home on Estero Boulevard with a Maserati or a less expensive home someplace else. When you leave your car out in the salt air, it gets destroyed. My car sits behind my house on the beachfront, and I have to use my windshield wipers in the morning to get the sand off my windshield. You can't park cars there, let alone the impact of the headlights going toward the beach in turtle season. That's an impact as well. So to try to control it and say people can't have garages or can't have privacy in their own yard with shrubbery, to me is the wrong approach. Now it's a matter if this body has the desire to discuss setbacks or discuss sunlight plane, which is another viable way to not have that giant shadow, because the concept of the sunlight plane is just not the canyon effect, but it's the idea that people get like sunlight, that there's actually a sunlight shadow across Sarah Boulevard or across your side street, that your window is not, you're not passing a cup of sugar to your neighbor through the window. And if you like that, that's great, but is that what we want? If we look specifically at current dimensional requirements, you mentioned 10%. In reality, we have 10% for the most part already. Because if your lot is a traditional 75-foot lot, it is a 7.5-foot setback. If you're less than 75, is that in all or just non-waterfront? It goes down, it drops to 10% if you have a non-standard, non-conforming. Any non-conforming lot drops to 10% anyway. So if you have a 40-foot lot, it's going to go to 4 feet each side. Is that correct? Minimum of 5.
Jason,
So-
why don't you pull your chair up to the table? And Sarah, you want to come over here and sit by me?
So
They
in
wanna
fact,
force
if you
ourselves
go,
on you.
in fact, if you
We'll get you a
switch to,
chair.
in fact, if you switch to 10%, I'm not advocating anything, I'm talking about just factual here. If you switch to 10%, the only lots that actually are impacted are those that are above 75 feet width, very large lots. And there are a number of those in locations. Now they then, at 10%, if it's an 80-foot lot, they get an 8 foot on each side, 99. So they're the ones that wind up having a reduction in footprint on the setback. All others are almost not affected. Just so you understand what 10% means, it's really only impacts a larger lot. So 10% does something for larger lots, but it almost doesn't do much across the board. But the whole concept of the 10% is to allow that variance for non-conforming lots, and we have so many on the island, and we have them in the neighborhoods and on the beachfront. So I think it's interesting that some of the communities, you know, on page 21 specifically, they talk about setbacks based on building height. You know, that's your other concept then, setbacks based on building height. So if you have a 45, you know, you can go anywhere from 25 feet to 42 feet or something, you know what I mean, within our code. But for instance, if you had a 40-foot high structure, then obviously you're going to have 20-foot setbacks on either side, which means that you need, you know, a pretty significant sized lot to allow a 20-foot structure. I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying, you know, to me, these are the conversations to have, that I wouldn't take away landscaping. I wouldn't take the right to someone's garage. But the sunlight plane is an interesting concept, and some variation in your setbacks, some combinations of those. What to do?
Could I just ask people, I see a big difference between Estero Boulevard and side streets. I agree
Yes.
that the issue is important for all the streets, for all, the whole community, but I think that there is a big difference between Estero Boulevard and the others, because Estero Boulevard is principally where the view corridor is monumentally important, because all of us experience Estero Boulevard. Not everybody experiences Jefferson Street. I do, but not everybody else does. But all of us experience Estero Boulevard, and that's the cohesive path that we all share and that we all enjoy some view. What do you think, Megan?
I think the other place that this plays a major part is in the Back Bay. I think that's the other, you know, when people are buying towards the back side of the island, is this idea that they can see the Back Bay too from their houses. And we've had many cases, a couple of cases, one recently down here, I believe, in which he wanted to actually, the house, if I remember, and I'm just going off of my memory, the house 2 doors away had built a code and they built in a way that they could maximize their view of the Back Bay. This other house, which was on the Back Bay, wanted to expand into that, and you know, the house next to it here I don't remember specifics, but I think that that is also important too, is that that's the other major body of water that people enjoy here too. That I think that that's also another important place, because we're seeing much larger houses, much closer going in on Back Bay too.
I have a comment. Well, I don't know. Some people believe that Sanibel, before 2004 hurricane wiped out a lot of the vegetation, was beautiful, and you couldn't see the houses nor the water. And that was up and down any street. So that's one way to view the nature and the setbacks. It wouldn't matter what's behind the vegetation, you can't see it anyway. But when it changes the uses of properties, where somebody that has, you know, 2 cottages or whatever on a property, and they decide to tear down and then they want to have side by side or whatever, their values change because now their setbacks have changed, and now they can't do that other than the pre-disaster build back, if that is, well, I still have a question about the pre-disaster build back before we leave, but that being said, that is, I think, really important to realize that if we were talking one time about giving a benefit for those who keep the garage open, they could go up an extra floor or something like that.
Mhm.
Well, in doing that, the next person who buys it is going to be handicapped and needs to have, you know, area downstairs that can store all the mechanical things or whatever for them to function, or whatever the need will be, a special exception that they'll be able to close that in. So I don't see that as a fair balance or even an answer to a wider view corridor, because, like I said, they can fill it in with landscaping anyway. And I agree with Joanne that I don't think we should control the landscaping. I mean, it is their paradise, and, you know, we give them a set of dimensions that they can build their box, and then we're designing their houses and doing everything else by designing their yards now, and they're underneath it whether they can have a garage. You know, I don't think the neighbor 3 doors down should have a right to your view, and they pay $200,000 and you pay $1,200,000. There's a difference, and those people who are buying the lots that cost 10 times, 20 times what the lots are on non-waterfront streets don't earn the right to see through your property. I mean, you know, it's like we have people walk across our seawall every day to fish, and when we go out there and say, "Excuse me, may we help you?" they say, "Well, we're just fishing." Well, can you fish on your own property? But, you know, the thing is that by having all those openings, people think they can come right through.
Oh,
I'm telling you.
but Jane, you're really addressing a pretty fundamental position here, and you know, I think the United States Supreme Court resolved many years ago the right of the municipalities to place restrictions on private property, and
We have those.
well, I think you're overgeneralizing here, and that, you know, if we want to make some changes, all we can do is draft changes, and people that are affected by these changes have a right to appear before the LPA and the town council to challenge what we're saying or what we might want to do, and that's when that issue should come forward.
Well, and I think that
Not that we shouldn't be doing anything because we're afraid somebody's property rights are going to be violated.
no, but I mean, all the land is purchased by someone here on this island, and when they bought it, they assumed the rights that were granted at the time that they bought it, and then we want to come in and change their size of box and things. And it is difficult for some to accept. And even if it's a pool deck or something like that they want to add, if there's a footer, they can't have it in that structure. You can't have just if they need to have a footer to stabilize their property, to maintain a paver deck so that water can go through, then that, if you put a footer in, it cannot be within that setback.
But
So-
Jane, your job.
Well, you're raising a lot of different
you're-
issues
But
on
we do
specific things.
individual issues,
Yeah.
but no, we don't.
Yeah.
We need to look at the whole town.
Right.
Our job is to look at what we want this town to look like, not what we want Jim's house to look like. What, and I don't know what your house looks
It's a
like. but-
condo.
Okay, well, I have no idea, but our charge is the entire island, not any particular given case. So in the entire island, what do we want it to look like? I mean, like Ray said, and you know, you were here too, and a lot of you were here. I remember what Hickory Boulevard used to look like. You know, I mean,
Little cottages.
it was, and now look at it, it is a wall. It is a wall. I don't want Estero Boulevard to look like that.
And I don't think any of the a general consensus of the residents, and even in this room, people don't want that wall.
I don't think when the town incorporated and we wrote the comp plan that we wanted Estero Boulevard to look like that. I mean,
Excuse me.
Go for it.
Not only did we not want it, but we specifically said in there that this is the way we want it. Now, at that time, it was more of encouragement, you know, and these are our goals and so forth. But as time goes on, those goals are more worthy than ever. And Joanne, I don't want to take anybody's landscaping away from them, you know? But there are different ways you can landscape, and there's different ways you can raise landscaping, and there's all kinds of different things that you can do. And I'm not in the business of taking away people's privacy, and that's not the goal either. And garages, I mean, that's a whole nother discussion. But the original goal was, and we go back to it, was to keep these, and that was a very, very worthy goal. And it was worthy 20-something years ago, and it's still worthy today. And if we don't get a handle on it now, will we ever? That's the question. So what I think we ought to do is poll this austere group right here and see if we have some sort of consensus on which way to go, and then start moving towards it. Because we're going to beat this horse to death for hours if we don't do something.
Well, and that's where these next 4 or 5 were ideas on how to, is part of direction as well. If you look at them, they're very married together between the sunshine plane, the setbacks, what's included in the setbacks, what's not included in the setbacks now, and then, you know, even on in this last one on 5, which came up, which is the AC and mechanical equipment, because that's encroaching now on other people, and the noise. That's a noise piece of all this too as well. Is that through all of this, we can come up with some idea that is fair and equitable to those who are coming to this island, wanting to build on it, but also protects the current residents that are here too as well. I pay for that beautiful treasure out there in my property values too as well, and that's that beach. And I think that is the piece that we have to remember here is that's a public treasure, and that we all want to enjoy, and also know that it's there too to enjoy. We all do pay a premium to be here, and we choose to be here. We choose, which means we choose to live within these new rules too as well. And no one's saying that no one can't have a big house, and no one's saying you can't have all these. It just is going to now fit a different profile.
Okay.
And that profile has to be good for all on the island.
Just for some clarification, since I wasn't here 25 years ago, what was the original goal that you're referring to? What specifically was that? And then what has changed that has made that goal not achievable?
well, FEMA had a huge impact on it.
Okay, what was the goal though?
The goal was open view corridors to the water. That was the goal. You should know all the time that you're on an island when you're on Fort Myers Beach. Not like like I said, just compare this right now to Hickory Boulevard. You don't know you're on water until you hit Doc's Beach House. Or, even, you just don't know it. And so that was the goal. Then when we contemplated, if I could pinpoint it, and Dan and Jane and Ray may disagree with me, but we were so focused on commercial redevelopment that we did not even think about how individual residential properties would redevelop. I guarantee you that those 3 houses that were built where the little shutter cottage came down, if you think about, there was one little cottage on that property that was about as big as this table. And now it's a 5,000 square foot home. So we never thought that would happen. We didn't even talk about it. That's how little we thought that would happen. What we thought would happen would that property would have been bought, and they would come in and say, you know, I want to put a little hotel here or a little condo building. Never did we anticipate these buildings. And so as these buildings started to come up, what we said was that the bottom space can't be usable, so that it, you know, there would be some opening at least there, but that's not what's happened either. All of that section has been enclosed. So it wasn't contemplated.
So when FEMA came, though, the only difference that FEMA made was it had to be higher. So FEMA didn't restrict the width or the enclosure.
Right.
No, but that it had to be higher, but then what that did, so just imagine if all these houses that have been built were higher, but there was nothing on the ground level. You'd have a whole lot of view corridor,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not what's happened.
And you're not gonna get it to happen. I mean,
Joanne? Oh.
Just a point of clarification, Jason, with regard to lot coverage, the 40% lot coverage, if your property's on Estero Boulevard and you have a fair piece of your property that is seaward of the coastal construction line, the seaward coastal construction line, was that 78 or 89 or whatever that, is that counted in your 40%?
No,
No.
no,
Very
it's
good.
not.
I just wanted to make sure, because that's a very important
That's
point.
spelled out somewhere. that it-
We've had
yeah.
numerous applicants try to calculate it, but
Yeah.
no, it does
Right.
not. We do not
Because
calculate.
some of these structures, it just appears they're larger than 40% of their lots. And I just wanted to clarify that we are still following that.
We are, correct.
Thank you.
But you raised the point of percentage coverage, and I think that has to be factored into this conversation as well. That's one way of effectively dealing with setbacks as well, because the percentage can have an effect on the capability of what can be built on the property, would affect the setback situation as well. Well, I think we ought to take a look at that.
Jim?
I was just gonna suggest, maybe a thought would be for a carrot versus a stick with respect. I was just down Hickory the other day, and you have these minimal side setbacks, but where the view corridor exists, it's completely blocked by vegetation almost throughout that whole Hickory. So the vegetation is a significant issue, but I do agree it's everybody's right to have their vegetation and do what they want to do. But I wonder if we could have maybe create a view corridor tax credit where people who leave that open would get some kind of a benefit, be rewarded for their behavior, and that way those who choose to take the tax credit could do so, and hopefully that if it's significant enough, you'd have enough people that would utilize that, because the view corridor isn't, I mean, I appreciate Rexanne's problem with having these massive towers next to their house that are disproportionate to their house, but if you have, the view corridor is critical, but that vegetation blocks that view corridor throughout Hickory, and certainly on Estero at certain points. But if we could incent the landowner to leave that open, or either through carrots or through sticks, I think that could really be helpful. But I just wonder if there's a way to, in a carrot fashion, encourage landowners to keep those view corridors open, because if we don't restrict vegetation, we're never going to see that ocean that you were talking about, which I think is really nice to see on an island every once in a while. But if there's a way to do it in a voluntary way where there's an incentive and people are rewarded for keeping that view corridor open by choice versus by mandate, maybe that would be helpful too. Just thinking out loud.
Jane?
I have a question. Is there any restriction on the front of everybody's property, Gulf Bay, back, no water, whatever? At the front of their house, if they wanted to put a 6-foot-high fence across their property and go back, could they do that?
No.
I didn't say across the
No,
water.
so
I
the,
said-
we have a lot of fences in the front setback, which shouldn't be there. So in the street setback, which
Mhm.
is generally the 25 feet, you can't go over 42 inches. Will probably.
In the street setback.
Correct. So your 6-foot-high fence is supposed to start at the 25-foot street setback.
Okay, so at 25 feet back, they
Right.
could have a 6-foot-tall fence.
Right. Whereas what we talked about today, where they were doing a pool, you can't have like a pool or other accessory structure in front of the house.
Mhm.
That's not applicable to the fence, but you can't have
Right.
the fence forward of
I
the
understand
6
that.
foot, above 42 inches forward of the 25-foot
Unless it was,
setback.
because like
So-
mine was pre-existing.
So if
Right.
we're going to not, if we're going to try to control the view corridor, you would also say you can only have 48 high, 48
42.
inches. 48 is
Well, so we,
a lot.
we need to go to 48. It is 42 right now, but we need to go to 48. But your point being
for-
limited, right? That's your point.
So, but that's the point. I mean, if you limit them on vegetation, okay, they want their privacy, they're gonna put up a 6-foot-tall fence. You're not gonna
You
see it
can't.
that way. Like, yeah, you can.
Well,
Not across
Right.
the front.
Well, the fence
Okay,
is
you're facing your
paralleling the,
house,
You
could
can
take
put
it
up a
right off
6-foot
the
fence
side of the
across your
houses
front,
and go to your property
as
line.
long as it's set back
Yeah,
out
the-
of the
25
front
feet.
setback.
But if you are on the water, there is a setback requirement with opacity. You can have it up to 6 feet tall, but it has to be 75% open.
Mhm.
So there are visibility requirements in the rear yard if you're on the water.
And that's only so many feet from the water, isn't that correct? I mean, it can go 6 foot high and then it has to stagger down or have visibility there?
25 feet, yes.
25 feet.
Jen,
So
you're
for
talking
canals,
about
it's mostly
fences along the side yard, right?
I'm talking about, here's the front of your house, right here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put a fence here, and I'm gonna put a fence here, and you can't see anywhere past my house because it's 25 feet back from the street. That's allowable.
We have a lot of, since there's been so many pools, we have a lot of fences, to your point, of you have the block of the house that takes up majority of the width to the setback. You leave with 7.5 and 7.5. And then there's a 6-foot fence, usually a gate or something that goes to the side property line and then runs down the back. To Sarah's point, the rear, it does keep it open, and that's generally from your rear view, especially if you're on the water, you have angled views, is what that's generally trying to protect. It does not preserve or protect anything from the street back to the water. And I just want to continue on that point, because I think you're hitting, I think Anita's point to, the biggest bang for your buck is underneath the structure, right? I know there's not a lot, but I just want to remind you that I know we can beat the dead horse, but there's a lot of gray, right? There's a lot of room for moving. It's not all or nothing. I don't want you to think in terms of extremes. So if there's opportunities, if you're interested, one of the biggest bangs for your buck is the underneath part of the structure. Those are, and to your point of we didn't envision it, you're talking about 2,500 square foot areas for parking and for storage. It is nearly impossible for us to enforce those not being converted unless we catch somebody in the act. It does encourage them to use the space. They all become game rooms. They all become other things. That's just the way pool cabanas, bathrooms somehow show up. That happens all the time. So the list goes on. There are things in your toolbox that you can, whether it's half of that, whether it's limiting it to 300 square feet, which has a tie to insurance. A lot of people don't realize when they build their house and they enclose it, if it's over 300 square feet, it jacks up their insurance costs until they get that first bill.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure, there's a up to 300 square feet of enclosure below flood for parking, storage, and access. Does not trigger an increase in insurance. Once you go over that, they get rated at a different premium, is my understanding.
Is that just for entryways?
No, it's for whatever you want, the storage, parking, or access below. It's triggers it, not that you have to, your regulatory part has to be tied to insurance, but there's a component there. So whether it's half of it, whether it's some of it, whether it's 300 square feet, it's not just, my point is it's not all or nothing. I think there's some, if it's an interest, because that is your biggest, that's true, that's your biggest bang for your buck. Otherwise, you're talking about an extra, 2.5 feet of side yard setback, maybe 3 feet, maybe 1 foot. I'm not sure what we're talking about here. You're talking about vegetation. There's a lot of different things that can go into that. So it's really, we write it in, your side yard setbacks have an impact, somewhat. You have your sunlight plane, which has a positive impact. That can be beneficial to both, somewhat. You still have the wall. And then your biggest bank, obviously we're talking about square footage, is your underneath part. And that applies internally and externally.
And it
I
feels
think
like
some of it has to be tied into what is the building, what does that wall next to you look like? And when does it start changing architecturally so it's not just a wall? That's especially for the interior lots, that probably has the biggest impact.
Well, and I see.
I have two things I'd like to say. number one, despite the fact that I would love to see us go back to all the little cottages, I am a realist and I know that's not going to happen. And when I am stating the positions that I state, I am not, and I loved his words, all or nothing.
Yeah.
I'm just about modifying this. Let's change it some. I'm not about huge changes. I want to make some changes so that this is better. And the way I look at it is we take little bites of the apple in lots of different places. I'm not all about the side setback. Let's change that a little. Let's change maybe something about landscaping a little, not everything about it, not saying that people can't do anything. Let's take little bites at the apple in lots of different areas. And my second thing I'd like to say is that I like what Ray said about maybe we need to do a straw poll here because we could talk about this all
that's
night.
where we were heading.
So if we could say, yeah, we've got a consensus to move forward on this, to look at,
Can I just say
and I would like to say that I hope everybody follows what I'm saying about let's take a little bite at the apple in lots of different areas. It's not just all about side setbacks.
Well, and that's where we were heading with this, is that, and Jane has something to say, and is that these are ideas and these are areas that are, it's interesting though that I felt like coming into this that we have not touched underneath, and that was like sacred space that we don't touch that underneath because of the cars and all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting it's being brought up. But again, back to the point is that all these add into something bigger.
Just quick question,
Joanne.
if you're taking a straw poll, I'm assuming that means that every lot everywhere on the island will be treated the same? That you're not saying that if you live on Astaire Boulevard, you're the ones that don't get to build under your house anymore or have a garage? Well, that's just the point I'm making. In the straw poll, I think we need to be clear. We're talking about this as everybody's house and everybody's neighbor gets impacted, no matter where you are.
Well, some parts are going to affect certain neighborhoods more than others, but I live on a side street. To me, it's not just about Astaire Boulevard. I said that earlier, that, you know, we keep talking about view corridor. To me, this isn't just about the view corridor, although everybody keeps talking about that. The effects of these oversized houses on the neighbors in many, many ways, which I could list, and I'm not going to do that because we've all talked too much. But this does apply to everybody. Now, some parts are going to affect certain people more than others, of course, but it's not just about Astaire Boulevard.
Jane?
I just wanted to make a comment about what he said about the garage. If you reduced it to half or whatever, or square footage of this, they're still going to put it across the front because they're going to want to drive in. They're not going to want to park back to back and only take half of it and have to pull out and get your car in every time that way. But the beauty of the stuff, of the garage, is that the stuff is contained and we don't have it blowing all over the place. Like in Hurricane Charlie, after Hurricane Charlie, everybody's stuff was out on the street because it had blown away and damaged every place else. Now the garages are bigger, and so they contain it all, and yes, they may have their pool table inside on the ground there, but then we'll have the pool table outside and the ping pong table over here, and that can all come blowing things, and frankly, I'd prefer not to have other people's stuff in my yard.
Hurricane Charlie.
I just wanted to follow up on Jane's. One of my concerns is looking at people's junk.
Yes, I agree.
And if you did not allow enclosed garages, we'd all be looking at washers and dryers and kayaks and
Lawnmower.
The point I made, though, was that we're not going to eliminate enclosed garages. It's little bites of the apple on lots of different areas. No one's about eliminating everybody's enclosed
But we
garage.
don't know what little bites of the apple means. I guess.
Well, 300 square feet. Is 300 square feet too small of a
Yes.
piece?
Yes,
How m-
that's one car.
Three-
Can we put it into context, just because I know design things, like if you're a 70-foot lot, and it's a 50-foot wide structure, that's 50 feet of width that you have at the bottom, right? So I guess, I understand your point, Jane. I think there's additional steps you would have to take if you're not gonna just allow them to do it across the entire frontage. I'm not advocating for any of these either. It's just trying to throw out ideas for you. You can have a substantial amount of square footage, you can have a substantial amount of width at the bottom, either way you go, whether it's 3/4 or 100% or 25%, you can make it be designed appropriately so it achieves what your goal is. Just, the question is, what is your goal?
Mr. Murphy?
And that's the point exactly. So if we agree as a group that the big picture is that You know, we want to improve the quality of life on the side streets. We want to improve the quality of life on Estero Boulevard with the view corridors and everything. Jim, you have it right on the head. You nailed it right on the head to incentivize people to do this. You know, we don't have to be the heavy hand of government coming down and say, this is the way it's going to be, blah, 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 blah. But if we can agree in principle that we want to move forward with this, with those lofty goals, then we can write incentives into our codes and say, you know, if you agree to do this, we'll do this A, B, C, and D, and move forward like that. And then we can never be criticized for not trying. You know, then if it doesn't happen, well, you know what? We gave it a shot. You know, or we can take the other approach and just say, by God, this is the way it's going to be, and do it. But which is the preferable way to go?
600 square feet is an average garage of 30 feet wide and 20 feet long. Now, that won't fit trucks and jet skis and kayaks and everything else in that. It's just to put the cars.
Getting into the minutiae.
Yeah.
Well, I'm talking, do you want it outside or you want it inside?
So I guess we're asking on principle, we would like to move forward with making changes to this. You know, and again, I think we did that last time as well, so we have got new members here too as well, but to also look at where we're going to look to, and these were some suggestions on where to look as well.
Roger wanted to comment.
Oh, Roger, sorry.
So, I won't comment on any dimension today. But I am going to comment on sort of perhaps the lower level decision that maybe you've all thought about but hasn't been stated as part of your conversation, so I'm going to state it. What you're really discussing in any criteria that you may want to revisit is what triggers a right versus a public hearing. And in considering the criteria, you know, at what point do you want to be sure the neighborhood has an opportunity to appear before you to say that what person X is planning on doing has an impact to me? And the LPA, whoever's sitting at that time, may say, well, yeah, there's an impact, but we don't think it's bad, or yeah, there's an impact and we think it's significant, and we need to address that as part of, you know, what we approve and what conditions we may place on that approval. So, I think that when you look at these dimensions, it's not okay, once it's there and then, you know, that person is locked out from perhaps doing what they want to do. There's a route for them to do what they want to do. They just have to be able to prove that it has a minimal impact on the community and their neighbors. And through that variance process. And so it's not, you know, it's just really a question of drawing that line of what can you do without asking anybody's approval. And but that doesn't mean that there isn't a route for people who can't meet that criteria to seek an exception. So let's not forget that as part of your deliberations.
I first want to hear from the group, and then we're going to do this in some steps here. Feel that these setbacks, you've got them in your packet, need to be modified, changed, or getting the job done. I mean, is this a place that we're going to look? Tim?
I think if you're looking at the idea where you want the view corridors, then you're going to have to address setbacks, side setbacks.
So you want them addressed?
As far as having them standard, one number fits all, I don't know whether that's the right way to go.
Lori? Yes or no on modifying them?
Modifying, yes.
I believe it was Jason who said that as it stands now, the setbacks are approximately 10% anyway, and I think going to the 10% would simplify everything for everybody and only impact the larger lots. That makes great sense.
Councilmember Shan?
I think it needs to be part of the discussion, whether it is a variation of if you take more height or more square footage in this top cupola, you must bring in your side setback, or if you change your sunlight plane, you must change it. It may be a ratio of things, but it belongs in the discussion.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, but that's only one of the issues. And-
I understand, we're gonna
Yes,
take this
and-
elephant one bite at a time.
And I think that, as to the, we have the situation as Bruce pointed out, some of the horses have left the barn, but a lot of horses are still in the barn. And if we don't do something now, and I mean now, it will be too late. It will be too late, because nobody is going to want a house that's gonna look different than the other mansions. They're not gonna build another little cottage or anything, and they're not gonna, they'll all be gone. They'll all be gone if we don't take some action. So I think it's imperative, reviewing the side yard setback clearly is a factor a main factor in this conversation.
Councilmember?
Do I have to vote? Am I required by law to vote?
No.
No.
Okay.
Chicken?
Excuse me, I concur with Dan. We need to do something, do it quickly. 10% is a good starting point for discussion. And we also have to look at the sunlight planes, absolutely, and the massing, which is what we'll talk about next.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I'll say no, and you need to consider that if you go to a 10% or whatever number, you're probably going to, the residential multifamily will gain space in the side setback, plus the commercial and the commercial marina possibly.
I'll say yes.
And I'm
if
in
they're at
agreement.
20.
I'm in agreement. Now, how, and like you're probably right. The number 10 was thrown out there as a number, and that these need to be examined closer, because it feels like this, as a greater whole, we're in agreement. This isn't getting it done, and we need to make a change. My consensus on that. The 10% number, it kind of. Don't think it was me. As part of this, the next piece, and I think this might parlay into this, is the sunlight plane or sunshine plane, because I think that if we start talking about, if we start talking about the height, we can also talk about those setbacks too as well, and it might alleviate the wall piece. So I want to keep both of those as part of this conversation. And this is from last discussion, the stair casing of the building, and that, if we're in agreement as we were, that the side setbacks aren't getting done, maybe there is where the carrot might come from. You want to go up, you come in. For every bit that you come in, you can go up. That would alleviate both of these pieces at some. And Joanne did a lot of research on this as well, if she would like to discuss it a bit, about the concept of a sunshine plane and what it would mean to both the side setbacks and the height.
Well, I actually didn't do a lot of research on it. I was just noting that it was used in other locales as well stated, and on our packet page 21, there are a lot of communities that do this. I did get a couple of photos from Longboat Key that does this. They call it the sunlight plane. I see others call it different things. But in any case, I think that it creates for design diversity, and it is an incentive-oriented type of approach, which would be my approach. And I think that if you're talking about just this, there's more than just a view down here. There's this whole beautiful blue sky that we have here, and the airflow and everything else. I like I'm not necessarily in favor of any of these things. I think that we need a conversation of how it works in our community, how these things might work, and some examples that we can. I may still not be in support of them, but we must have the conversation and see how functionally they might work for us.
Does anybody have any comments about that idea, even from our last conversation, about this idea that, you know, as we go up, we come in. So we're incentivizing them, we're giving them the carrot that these side setbacks that we're all in agreement aren't working, is that if you want to go up, you're going to come in, which will then expand our side setbacks and our front setbacks. But also, you know, if you don't want to, then you're going to come down in size too, and we'll maintain the sunshine plane.
I brought this up before, Megan, and it got very bad airplay.
Okay.
My suggestion was, you know, if you consider the majority of people's experience at car or pedestrian bicycle level, what difference does it make if the building is 40 feet or 50 feet? It doesn't. But what it does make a difference of is if we said incentivizing a property owner to not utilize every square foot of their property because they want to have a 5,000 square foot house, instead utilizing less of their property. It's sort of like this. Here's a piece of property, and here's what we're incentivizing, what we're letting people do right now. They're building this. But if we let them build this, we gain this. And if we could regulate it some way so that this has to stay open, I think this is a better option. But again, back to the days, we were also obsessed with height. And we were obsessed with height because of Diamond Head. So we were focused on how tall something was going to be as opposed to the experience you have with that thing.
I think we all have to realize that the height's going to keep going up. FEMA's not ever going to lower it. I mean, it's so I think maybe take a straw poll. I'm all in favor of a sunlight plan like this. I don't mind going up extra 5 feet and incentivizing people. I mean, I think you want, and you'll get different architecture out of it too. You're not going to have the same box. I think the architects, I think architecturally and just from experience of Vista, I think it's going to be much better.
For clarification, you're saying give them an extra 5 feet if they come in?
Yeah.
Okay.
5 feet going
Are you
up.
Just
talking
numbers.
about giving an extra floor? I mean, if you're not getting an extra
It's
floor,
an
you're
extra
not,
floor.
Yeah.
yeah, you're not
Or
getting.
it's making what, here was another flaw in our brilliant plan, the whole cupola thing.
Yeah.
Well, that cupola was supposed to be nothing.
Right.
Well, it's not nothing. So now that it's there, what if we allow people to use that space instead of some floor space?
And you must recognize that that's a really valuable space up there.
Of course it is.
Uh,
Sure. It's great
you're
view
talking
space.
view, yeah.
Absolutely.
You're going to trade, rather than having the 250 square feet on that third floor, which you're currently allowed uninhabitable, 150 feet habitable, which people cheat anyway, let's be honest. You can't go in, and I see them on the real estate listings all the time, bonus space. But at any rate,
Gotta list it as something.
yeah. So, but that's really valuable square footage. I mean, I would come in here and here and here and have my master bedroom up there. Yeah, absolutely.
Where we would really gain is from the commercial use, because commercial has several lots, maybe blocks, that they can go a cement building like this, but if they could take it and put another layer of floor up there and go like this, we'd have huge. That's where you could really gain. A residence only has a 50 or 75-foot lot on most lots. You're gonna gain inches by.
Well, we did that on the Pink Shell. And that was a perfect example of where we traded off height for corridor.
Yep.
And we got a lot of heat because when that last Pink Shell building was built, it grossly exceeded the height requirement of 35 feet, you know. But But we opened the corridor between the proposed plan and what we allowed them to build. And we had some other trade-offs too along, you know,
The bayside.
removal of the cottages
Yep.
along the, open up the whole bayfront side too. But anyway, that turned out, I don't think anybody is very annoyed or objectionable to the Pink Shell Resort. I think it's a pretty attractive addition to our community. And so that, as you pointed out, there was obsession about height at that time, but I don't think anybody's really too bothered about that Pink Shell building being that high. I think they're more interested in seeing, looking at the overall project that it resulted with considerable open corridor there. And, you know, so that's something we did by variation and exception that we should consider codifying in the ordinance.
I would vote for it then. Because if TPI went this way as
Yeah.
opposed to this way,
Right.
there would be much more view corridor, and there's nothing that high that would have a view over it anyway from the back.
Yeah, except it was the view from the bridge is
Yeah.
what we were protecting there. But that's interesting, Joanne, you know, since we're in a public meeting, I'm just gonna say this to you, because, you know, when we just saw, he just sent us that updated video and stuff. Did you think of the roof and what that could have looked like a little, I kept thinking, gosh, 2-3 feet on that roof, it would look so much better, but whatever.
But again, I think we have to distinguish here the commercial from the residential situation. too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But But I do think, though, that we accomplish both, though,
Yeah.
by giving them an incentive to go up. They come in, it accomplishes those view corridors down the side, gives them their floor space that they all want, and gives us hopefully, you know, through the next couple of discussions, some better looking, you know, aesthetically, rather than just a square box kind of look to the place.
Does anyone know what the requirements are down on Hickory Boulevard? Height and width and,
Jane, remember
Just
we looked at this, was it, I think they have more height, or they have, or do they have less height and less setback? I can't remember what it was. Oh, we looked at it once. We should find that out, because that would be a great comparison.
yeah, 'cause, you know, I'm about data and comparison. If we change this, what happens to that? I need to see stuff.
Yeah, me too.
I don't understand.
But you know, another thing, I'm sorry, Jim, if I could just say, another thing I just thought of, where there's opportunity, you know, we've talked about at the last joint meeting whether or not 2 units means 2 houses, or if it means a duplex. So if it meant a duplex, like I believe it means, not 2 houses, if it meant a duplex, and the duplex, now you really have an opportunity for incentivizing height versus space. Because you could, you know, go ahead.
I really like this idea, because you're giving the property owner choices, and then if it's goal of the town is to open up these view corridors, and you can give them some additional height, maybe you give them some bit more height, or in addition, if they agree to keep their corridors open for vegetation and fencing. Say, if you keep these wide open, we'll give you even X amount more height, and then now you could solve your problem all through a very positive incentive-based program.
I think we also have to be very, very careful, though, too, as we get higher and higher and higher, and we keep talking about it. You know, we also have the opportunity, the other problem with Hickory is that there's no sunlight, 0 sunlight on that drive. If you're riding a bicycle down there, there's 0. I mean, it is, and to maybe look at that, too. Is that a issue of how close they are to the street as well, and not setback, because we have further we definitely have further setbacks from the street level. But that would be something to look at, because we could potentially end up with a different problem. We may have these, you know, nice side yards, but, you know, we can see the water, but we see no sunshine either, really, if we're not careful here too as well. So that was other piece of it is the massing piece of this too as well. You know, and do we do that through design, or do we do that through incentivization through this too as well? You know, or else we have these really tall, thin boxes. We still have the box.
So I just want to point that out, because incentivization is great. However, that means typically, that you're starting from where you're at and adding extra layers on top of that, not pulling back the height and then creating the tier effect or whatever from that.
no.
So I want you to make sure you understand that.
No,
I think we,
we
Okay.
don't understand it that way.
Okay, well then,
I don't.
it's an incentive
The way I'm
5
look-
years from now, once you start implementing it. It's not an incentive today. I just want to make sure that you understand that.
The way I'm looking at it is we've already allowed people to do that supposedly unused space up there that they're using anyway.
Right.
So we give them that and say,
Correct.
okay, you can use that space now. And that's your incentive.
So it'll be a relationship of that to additional side yard setbacks or something of the trade.
well, I think the other piece that he's also talking about is where do we measure height from?
Right.
Because that's been a discussion a couple times of where do we measure height. We measure height different than any of the other communities around us too as well, which is how we've gotten these tall buildings.
Correct. And if you don't tie the two together, then you don't fix the problem that you're talking about in the neighborhoods. You just hope that the next one somewhat fixes it, but it's going to be even taller to do that.
So so what you're kind of saying is look at the regulations, make some changes to regulations, and then make the modifications, the incentivization off of that.
Sure. So instead of an example of 35, some can go to 25, some can go to 35. You dial everything back to 25 and say to go to 35, you have to do A, B, and C. Or you pick a point that you're comfortable with, and also you start measuring differently is essentially what you have to do. Because right now the roofs are what are part of the issue is the mass of the wall, but also the mass of the roofs have become so big because the structures are so big, and then the extra windows for architectural purposes make that roof line even wider. That's part of what's driven this problem.
Number 3 or 3-ish.
Yes.
You have any comment to add to it?
No, I was going to say the same thing regarding how we measure height. I think that we need to combine how we measure height, the permitted height, and
I can't hear you,
massing.
could you?
Okay, I apologize. I was saying this, I was thinking the same thing, that we need to combine how we measure height, the height that we permit, the number of floors that we permit, and the massing as well as the setbacks. It all needs to be a combination of carrots and sticks to allow people to develop, do additional height, do the type of development that they want, and still make it an attractive design that's palatable to the community. And I think that that's very, very possible.
And I'll give you an example. We were doing research, and just this week I found, I think it's Matt Lachey overlay in Lee County. They have a height, which they measure the same way we do to the bottom of the eave, but then they also have a maximum height of the roof. Other places measure to the mean roof line, which would change our measurement of height. So there's different ways you can do it, and that Matt Lachey example is probably a good example of here's your 20 feet or 25 feet of height, and your roof can be no more than 11 or 12 or 14 feet. And it's got to be, and then you figure out architecturally how you make that work. So there's a couple layers there to sort through, but I think, I get your points. I just want to make sure that, there's 5 or 6 different ways to do it.
Because it's going to fall to you guys to come up with this plan.
Well, I mean, ultimately with this type of thing, we have to bring up 3 or 4 options, and then you're going to pull from each one and make a 5th option, ultimately.
But I think you guys get where we're going. Yeah? I know you do. I can tell by your face.
We're never going to be Matt Lachey,
No,
but
of
I'm,
course not.
I'm sure glad that they're doing that out there. I mean, because without that, Matt Lachey is no longer. And Fort Myers Beach, I mean, although there are some horses out of the barn, they're not all out. And I agree with that. I mean,
Well,
we can
Ray,
make-
you remember when we incorporated, everybody said, why are you incorporating now? It's already over
Well,
with.
they said the same thing with Sanibel.
Yeah, of
They
course
said the
they
same
did.
thing with Sanibel.
right.
And of course, they jumped on it earlier, but these are all incremental things, that you can do your own little piece, and I think that we should try that.
I think the biggest save to the character has been the change to the 50% rule, permitting and whatever. That's been huge, and I think that this conversation can assist.
Okay. So I think we're saying that, to get our setbacks, get the box changed, we're looking at incentivizing, giving them some carrots in order to go keep their square footage or close to, they can go higher, but they're coming in. Are you good with that?
Yeah, I think we need a whole little basket of things to choose from to put together. So maybe it's incentives, but maybe it's also a regulation. Okay.
And I just want to add to that, because we had talked about this before, and I forgot to mention it today, is, and Jane, to your point, you can change the box, but the square footage could be the same. So you can change the side yard setbacks and decrease a rear setback. So if you're on the Gulf, you're not affecting anybody. And we do have pretty substantial rear setbacks in this town compared to other places.
Yeah.
So there's opportunities there where you can squeeze in one area and elongate in another area. It just changes the shape of the box, that's all.
Just one last point. I just want people to know that, you know, this isn't some, Jane, it's not a land grab by the town. It's not, you know, we're not trying to clamp down on everybody and do this. This could have the other effect on people. You know, you think this might hurt their property values in the short term. In the long term, this could increase their property values. We would be in a very unique situation down here where we've set the rules in place, and people adhere to those, and they drive down and they see this. Man, where are we? What community is this? You know, and it could have the other effect. You know, I mean, property values. I mean, we may look back 30 years from now with this conversation and say, my God, you know, look where we are now. I mean, not that I necessarily want that, but you know, so you know, it could have a very good effect.
Well, just as a comment, like on a 50-foot lot, if they have, well, some neighborhoods have 5%, this has 7.5%, but if we do the 10% rule, it would have, you know, smaller corridors on a 50-foot lot, and if you left them at the 7.5, they only have a 35-foot width that they can build on, and a garage is 30 feet wide. So if you want them to have their stuff underneath and not out where everybody has to look at it.
Garage is 30 feet wide?
For 2 cars to park. I put in average square foot for a garage. It's 30 by 20. And that doesn't fit a truck. So, you know, that's the key, is that if you, you know, that's why I'm saying there isn't a lot of incentive for a 50-foot lot to do anything different, because they can barely, you know, put something in the 30 feet.
I guess my feeling is, if you are a person who wants to have 3 or 4 jet skis and 2 or 3 cars and a big truck, you need to be buying a bigger than a 50-foot lot.
But they don't have to. That's the problem.
That's too bad.
But they don't have to. There's no regulations that you can't have all that stuff out front.
Once
That's the
again, if you're
problem.
talking about the open space on the ground floor below flood elevation, I think that would need to be incentivized as well, so people can make a choice. If they choose to leave a little more open space and come in and, you know, have a little overhang, let's say, and some open here and closed in more, then that would be could be compensated and designed someplace else. But, you know, when you have a structure that let's say you're just building on the waterfront, and you have an elevator, you have your entryway, and, you know, don't forget, we're also mostly a senior population, or, you know, whether you're renting or whatever, people aren't going to go up and down the steps. So they have elevators in there and entryways, and then they need their cars, and, you know, there's a fair amount of square footage there. I don't think you can take it away unless you incentivize it.
And figure out how to regulate all their stuff outside. I mean, that's the worst part of it, is that they'll take it and then they'll figure out, oh, I've got all this other stuff, where am I gonna put, now I need a shed, and, you know, so you got sheds everywhere.
Well, that's
I gotta-
their problem.
We can't
That's
solve
not our
everybody's
problem.
problems. We can't solve
But they
all
can
of
have
it.
it.
Okay.
So we're still not keeping our thing open. They're gonna put their shed on the, you know, 7 foot in, and it's right there.
Okay, well, I think we're good with one.
Except
Yeah.
we didn't talk about the stoop setbacks.
No, we're
No,
good.
we're moving on to
accessory
that.
structures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
You good with
But
one
I
and
do
two?
believe, though, that, and Jane, you were gonna come up with an example for everything, everything that happens here. I get it. You know, there's lots of one-offs. We have examples all up and down this island. But that is also part of the process of coming in front of us as well, and asking for variances and changes and such. And I don't know of any code that's gonna solve every situation. It just doesn't happen. Because everyone reads it differently, everyone's gonna try to get away with what they can get away with, and we've seen that a lot lately. So, we gotta do what we best can to catch as much as we can and deal with the other stuff as one-offs.
Okay, stoops.
Stoops. So what do we want? Originally, the way I understand this is that this idea was that we were going to be a front porch community, and we could have these front porches on front of our houses and decks on the front and such of that sort that weren't that could encroach into the into the setbacks.
Yep.
The question was raised: do we want to get your setbacks or your setbacks, and all that has to be included in the footprint. Period. So your front porches, your decks, everything have to fit inside your setbacks. And your architectural pieces and such of that sort have to fit inside of that, and that they cannot encroach on the setbacks. Because they do now. I mean, they build their box, they build their house, and then they put stuff on the front of it. You know, they put nice little, and we want not necessarily to get rid of all the architectural features, but those do encroach into those setbacks as well. So the question was raised, is a setback just a setback, and everything has to fit within inside those numbers? And then that would be a change to the code to do that.
Well, because what they're putting out there is not a 42-inch high thing. It's a stairway
Right.
that goes all the way up and circles around, and you know, we've got one on Carolina.
I was
we've got
just
one
thinking
on,
about the Carolina one. Yeah.
you know, you've got
But that's not a porch. So what
That's a stairway.
what we talked about
Had to
were
get permitted.
porches. And especially, we talked about it relative to side streets.
And
As a matter of fact, the
balconies.
picture on the comp plan is that very view.
It depends on if they're cantilevered or if they have things in the ground, which then
So if I may,
change the view corridor.
Jason Green. It's poorly written, so at a minimum it needs to be rewritten. But secondly, to your point, it's been, I guess the envelope's been pushed, is the term I'll use.
I was going to say manipulated.
Well, so
But envelope being pushed is nice.
poorly drafted leaves open for interpretation.
Yeah.
And then that's why you end up having the 2 stories of porches. And it's not supposed to be cantilevered out. It's supposed to be, I think, ground level front porch pre-FEMA issues, which is difficult to do now, especially in a V zone. So that's part of the issue. Poorly written and poorly regulated, I guess is what I'll say.
I would say in addition to that, it's poorly written in what specifically is wanted, but also the definitions are not clear, so there's not any way for us to define a porch versus a stoop versus a balcony, you know, which has a roof over it, which does not, which is elevated, which is not, and I think that some clarity on that would be very helpful.
And I think with height, taking into account separating access versus usable porch space and really extending of living space, those are 2 different things. And it doesn't differentiate between those. So those are considerations to take into account. Stairs and access, things of that nature, maybe. But when you add on a 25 by 30 front deck and 2 stories of it, and that really extends your living space upstairs, that's kind of what they're really pushing for now.
Yeah, and I would say a good point to that is the access. If you have a tall home, you know, if it's elevated on stilts, there's a good reason to have stairs that can go into that setback. But then what type of other features do you want to permit in that setback? And do you want to say just stairs? Specifying what it is that you're allowing in that setback would be helpful.
Any comments, anybody? Before I'm going to go around and ask people your questions.
Maybe we tighten up the definitions. If we agree to keep everything within the setbacks, then they submit their plans and they go through the same thing everybody else does. If they want to go out of the setbacks, then they apply for a variance, or they apply in their building plans. This is what we want to do. Give them a public hearing. The people in the neighborhood get to come by and comment and say, you know, that's okay. You know, that doesn't bother us. You know, if they want to do that, that's fine. And, you know, if down the street, if somebody wants to do it and the neighbors come out and say, we don't want to do that, then don't do it. You know.
It sounds like they're for eliminating it then, and then letting them come in front of us for the exception.
The
Well,
question is like those little canvas awnings that go out, you have to move your house back to have that setback out. Your air conditioners need to be encaved into your house for
Well, that's the
those-
next discussion.
Okay, but also,
Wait, is that really the practical, what is the, can somebody give me a good visualization, other than, like, I can visualize this house on
Okay.
Carolina, that
okay,
the
for-
stairs were out, so,
another one was down on Estero Boulevard, the 6,000 block that had stairway that was gonna come down like this.
mhm.
They had to go to really, really short steps to be able to put it in because they didn't calculate that right or something, and they couldn't, there was no way for them to
Okay,
have
I
a front
remember that.
entrance. The, for like the, for what other thing you want,
No, so
Carolina is easy.
So what other than stairs are being, is that envelope being
Porches.
pushed on? Porches.
Cause
Two s-
Carolina has that too.
Yeah, two-story porches and covered porches as opposed to deck areas. I mean, it essentially becomes part of the house because of the way the structures are built. It looks like the front of the house as opposed to a deck or a porch on the front of the house, or even a balcony that's uncovered.
Then it gets enclosed.
well, I think there's some problem with the existing language on page 6. And it's been pointed out by Ray and others that, first of all, I'm not exactly sure what the hell a porch and a balcony, a stoop is either, you know, and, I'm sharing Anita's concern. I'm trying to visualize, you know, what different structures are we thinking about here? But it seems to me there's an inconsistency between B1 or with B, which says it can extend up to 10 feet in the street setback zone, which is normally 25 feet. And then in B2, it says it can be no closer than 10 feet to the street right-of-way. So that, if it's, that to me is inconsistent. You know, if you're in a 25-foot right-of-way and come out 10 feet, then it's gotta be 15 feet from the street right-of-way, but not 10 feet. So something, maybe I'm
Maybe
I-
it's
I
for an earlier non-conforming house or something that you couldn't put a porch on it.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, for non-conforming houses or for instances where a variance was granted for a house, where it could be closer than the traditional right-of-way setback. I think that's the instance, but you are correct, it doesn't make sense most of the time.
And I think it was written like you were gonna have different front setbacks,
yeah.
and you don't. So,
So the point
Yeah.
is that a new building coming up should meet all the setbacks. They shouldn't get variances unless there is a, you know, two-sided or three-sided house on a property, or a, then you get to pick your sides and your fronts and backs, but,
I mean, if
You
it's
know-
an awkward lot.
right, like those houses on Palermo that go down the skinny, like, I will not name names, but,
Isn't there an example of the porch on a Palermo house where it extended out
That's-
just recently? Yeah.
yeah, that was a new construction, vacant land, never been built on before, and they got 3 variances.
Well, that
vacant
wasn't
land.
done by variance. That porch was not done by variance because he could put it on the front and move it, make a bigger
They don't
envelope.
they only meet 1 setback.
Just FYI, a stoop is a staircase leading into the home, typically smaller than a deck, a porch, or a patio. So a stoop is basically like the landing.
Like if you have a stairway goes up here, and then you have a
boom,
little
that's
seat
the
here,
stoop.
and then it goes up this.
Porch is obviously a porch. Yeah, they got stoops.
well, and so what's happening?
Baltimore, Maryland.
So the codes aren't keeping up with design innovations in design, I guess I'll call it, in that they're having a lot of the stoops are internal to structures now. And also, if you think about if a 50-foot, 40-foot wide house by the 10 feet, you're adding 350 to 400 square feet to the living space, because you can push the front porch, that architectural feature, out into the right of way. So your box that you can build on, you've added 300, 400 square feet per floor to the living space.
Yeah.
That's why they're doing it.
Well, and that's why you should be able to do it.
So I was
I'm-
recently in one of these big houses, and, oh, honey, come here. You are hungry.
Give her a cracker.
And the porch was absolutely part of the house. Absolutely part of the house.
And a lot of them are enclosed on 3 sides.
Yes,
and,
this was
and
enclosed
it's
on
not the way
3
it's
sides.
supposed to be, and
Uh-huh.
that's what's happening.
And so it's encroaching and adding to that envelope, and it's another way. I think that we've looked at the LDC glitches and such of that sort, that's being manipulated to in many, many ways. I am for eliminating it. Tim?
You know, sitting here listening to all of this, what I'm building in my mind is a 3-dimensional box on a piece of property. You know, we talked about height restrictions as far as looking at the canyon. Do I want treetops or rooftops? We talked about side clearances, view corridors. When we look at this 3-dimensional box, we have the ability of creating those dimensions.
Yeah.
Anybody who wants to build on a piece of property, here is your 3-dimensional box. Build whatever you choose inside that 3-dimensional box.
That's the footprint.
That's the footprint.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm referring to earlier, but
Now, anybody who pre-existing that is over one of the setbacks that we may or may not change, they'll have to come in front of us for a variance. But any new construction, this is the 3-dimensional box. You design it and build it, one, so you can sell it, but to any design you want within these parameters.
But the box is created by the setback requirements, as well as the.
It is.
As far as the area limitation. So the setback requirements are still you know,
This is where we
what
set
you're
the
saying really
dimensions
is
for that
no
box.
construction in any of the setback areas.
So you-
None.
So
There
you're for
shouldn't be any.
eliminating this.
Not on new
That's what you're
construction.
saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're for eliminating this
Extension.
extension?
Yes.
So you,
Yes.
That makes it easier for the planning department.
You want us to go this way? Yeah. Okay. Jane?
I'm gonna say there are exceptions based on odd-shaped lots, but I think that the new construction should fit in a box, unless it's a pre-disaster build-back.
Yes, but maybe they get a porch if they limit their vegetation on their side setbacks.
All righty.
Yes.
I didn't hear, what did he say?
if I'm hearing the question right, you're saying that on the front of a house, you cannot have a balcony.
No, you could,
Well, you
it just
could.
has to be within the setback.
In your box.
Right now, they can extend out and then attach it to the house and close it on three sides. It's part of the house. But they've encroached on the setbacks through using this particular code.
Okay, so then we're gonna get people building the box to the setback, and we're gonna see a big vertical wall
That's right.
with no
We already see that.
architectural thing, with no architectural things coming out. So I say no.
Dan?
Well, I don't think that there should be an absolute prohibition. There should be situations where there can be encroachment into the side yard setback,
Side, you're just saying side, this is
It's
front and
front.
rear.
front and rear.
So you're looking to you want the code modified rather than eliminated?
Modified.
You have an idea?
Yeah, I have a suggestion. How about we would limit the square footage that could be created by a porch or a deck, so that people that have, second-story living space might be able to still have a staircase in the front, especially, a lot of the older houses, the way they were designed, they had a deck on the second story, they had stairs going up to it, so it does encroach somewhat into that setback, but limit the square footage so you can't have a two-story enclosed deck essentially on the front of your house and create a massive amount of additional living space.
And the square
Forward.
footage should be included in the 40%, in my view as well, whatever, regardless of whether it's in or out of the box.
There.
That's interesting.
Well, that's interesting.
Well, how would you get to that?
What's
porch
that
you're
number?
Allowing without steps if you're, to that second story?
Okay, so Dan threw in a loop. What are you saying, Ray?
The reason I say modify, because we're talking about if, well, we can resolve these other situations if people want to do this by variation, but keep in mind the statutory requirement for a variation, and if you really strictly adhere to those statutory requirements of unique circumstances, hardship and so forth, very, very few times you could justify building a porch into a setback.
That's true. You didn't allow those.
But you would want them to.
At least in my view, is how I interpret the strict application of the variation requirements, which are not only statutory, but in our code.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ray?
What if you
know
can't
either.
leave the porch?
I mean, when it started, I was fine with,
Eliminate.
eliminating the intrusion into the setbacks, and I still am in principle, but I can see where there would be a lot of cases where, it would happen, but I think I'm still in favor of, if there were codes to operate within, and it could be done prior to getting their permits, that whether that's by variance or not, I don't know, but I still think there should be a path to allow it if absolutely possible. But you know what I'm saying? I know it sounds wishy-washy here, but the law, I guess the short answer is no. No, I would not want them to.
What if they could cantilever out and not bring the whole structure down to the ground, and that way they're not really into the setback, or into the airspace above the setback?
Well, I go back to what I said earlier. I mean, if it doesn't bother the neighbor next door to me, why should it bother me?
It's not that easy to get a variance. That
No.
doesn't qualify it.
No. Well, it's a difficult question. There's no doubt about it.
I still
What
think
do
that
you say,
somebody's
Rex?
Well, I feel the discussion on this one has been slightly different than the others. And what I've been hearing in this discussion is that both Sarah and Jason have been saying this provision causes them problems the way it's written.
Yeah.
So what I would like to see is what do they propose to help them? And so I would like to see what it is they would look at with this, because it's partly poor draftsmanship and things of that nature. So I'd like to see what they would do with it. So my answer is yes, but specifically as to them looking at it because of their direct experience with the problems they've had with this section.
Yeah, I agree with that. Go ahead,
Joanne?
I concur with that thought, and I also concur, if I'm reading correctly, what Dan had just mentioned, but with this box, this 40% box, and I call it living, breathing, shall we say, if you want to come this way a little bit, then you're going to have to come in on the sides. In other words, you never give on the sides, okay? But you can give front and rear for some of these kinds of design considerations if you're then taking in on your side setbacks. So we're always working toward increasing side setbacks when we give our flexibility. So that 40% would always be kind of going this way instead of that way. And it might go this way.
I agree with all my peeps.
Okay.
I agree with
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just a thought that's running through my head listening to the comments, and that is that if you move people to the cake layer thing, there'll be plenty of room for their decks.
Yeah, it'll be natural deck.
There you go.
Well, if we're still on the street setbacks, I have a question on your D, on 2D.
What page?
6,
On 2B,
2D,
2D.
on page 6.
Awnings and canopies?
No, bus shelters.
Bus shelters and bicycle racks.
So, so what you're saying is you are now not going to allow the bus stop benches that have advertising on them? That's written right there. And also, where is there a telephone booth on this island? Do we need this in here?
Nowhere in the
For
world.
point of reference, that's your existing code, and that's been there for
That's right.
2 decades.
Okay, so unless we're going to change it, we should correct that because that is
Correct.
existing?
I'm sorry, what, this is your existing code
This
that we're
is
discussing?
I
existing.
know, I'm saying that we should change it, or we need to tell all those people to take those benches away.
That's another topic
I
because
was
we're,
didn't you guys should bring
because
that up?
I thought we were
but
cleaning this up.
we're working on that with Lee-Tran because they're charged per year an amount of money if we don't allow advertising on them. And if you do allow advertising, the town gets money every year. So, yes, this is in the code and it probably doesn't belong in there, and that's a whole different conversation.
But could we take E out? Does everybody agree we don't have a telephone booth anywhere?
I love telephone booths.
I do too. Let's put some in.
There's still
Those
some in
doors
existence.
that
We saw some
sometimes
not
you
too
get
long.
stuck. I got stuck in a telephone booth once. That wasn't
All
fun.
right.
No, not with anybody, unfortunately. That would. No, Joanne.
So if I have this right, we're now talking about making a modification to the code now, specifically B, which is what we're talking about, in which we're looking at, if I remember, got this correctly, somewhat eliminating them to a point that it's a percentage of square footage addition on the front here to allow for somebody
We don't- we
need-
don't-
we have a couple options we'll bring
Yeah.
back. I think it's.
We
it's-
don't want to
we're gonna-
change the 40% box, the living,
Yeah.
breathing space. They can, it's
and
like a,
Joanne's comments sparked an idea, so
Good.
we'll talk about it offline, I guess.
Okay,
So we know that there's a couple different options, and we'll bring those
Great.
back to you.
great,
all right, thank you.
thank you.
Just wanted to make sure we had something moving forward on that as well. So next on our agenda is the elevated swimming pools that I've shown. Yeah.
There were comments made the last time the LPA and the town council sat in a joint session about the minutes. And so it would be helpful as you finish each item if you
Could give a brief recap,
Okay,
if you don't mind.
okay. All right, on agenda, so you want me to start with number 3?
Well, you just finished talking about stoops.
Yes, so 3, agenda item 3.
Yes,
Okay. So on this particular, to summarize what was just discussed, which was potentially eliminating the stoops, porches, not eliminating, but making them go into the footprint, is now we have multiple in stoops suggestions on how to handle this by modifying the code that specifically town members, Sarah and Jason will be bringing back to us.
That was number 2.
Perfect, thank you.
it was number 3.
It was number 3.
Well, how come it says 2 right here?
Okay, elevated
Okay.
swimming pools.
Elevated, moving on to agenda item number 4, the elevated swimming pools. And was asked to provide input to update the code regarding the elevated pool regulations.
You want me to just touch on what we're doing?
Yes, please
So
do.
essentially, we don't have an established height, but it's essentially 3 or 4 feet. I forget what we're using, but anything over that, we're basically determining is part of the principal structure and has to meet the principal structure setbacks. Some of that, it's a moot point. If you're in a V zone, it's got to be elevated or flush with the ground, but we do have massive concrete structures that are extensions of the house, and then the pool sits in them. So it's all one piece. We are requiring those to be subject to rear setbacks, to principal structure setbacks, excuse me.
So again, fitting back into the initial footprint of the setbacks.
Right, I think what we would like to do is clarify and establish what height that becomes that point, so it's not an interpretation. And then also obviously open for you is the 5 feet a sufficient setback for the pools? And the third component of that, what we've done in the past, is an administrative interpretation about where you measure the pool from, because there's a component of the deck that is essential to the pool. So those are kind of three things that we've looked at in the past, or had to deal with in the past. So it sounds, my conversations with you all is everybody understands the elevated 15-foot high monolithic concrete structure needs to be part of the principal structure. The second part to that is what height, which we think about 4 feet, and then is 5 feet enough once it's below that.
So are you asking, or clarify for me, is your view when it's an elevated pool, the 15-foot thing, is that part of the 40%?
It's part of the 25-foot rear setback, or the principal structure side yard setback. And then, is it part of the 40%? I don't remember if we were counting.
I don't know that we've calculated it as part of the 40%. We do count it as part of the impervious surface calculation.
Yes.
Typically with the 40%, we're looking at roof coverage. The way we've looked at it previously is what's under roof. So the house, sheds, cabanas, that type of thing. But we do count it as part of the impervious surface. And it counts as the principal structure setback. So it has a greater setback than an accessory structure. But if you felt that it should be part of the 40%, I think that would be something we could, easily put into the code.
Well, I'm not offering an opinion. I'm just asking the question: is it or is it not? It sounds like
So
it's
no,
not.
we're not.
I don't think it has been. If it has, if it were, it's certainly been violated. And I don't think it was intended to
No,
be included.
there's not even,
Yeah.
It's a stretch to say that it has to be
Right.
included in the 40%. You would really
Right.
have to be looking for a reason to do that. They're not tied together in the code.
So are we looking for a clarification in the code so that we start counting it after, is 5 feet sufficient?
So at grade
Mm-hmm.
is 5 feet. And part of that we've added, it's essentially, I guess the pool itself would be 6.5 feet. I think, was it the 18 inches, Sarah, that we did? I'm trying to remember the number. But we're trying to count not just to the water's edge. We're trying to count a portion that's required by code for safety, building code for safety purposes, or lip around it essentially. And we get into a big discussion with people about decking versus the pool itself, and the code is not clear on that. So we did an administrative interpretation that the pool, the measurement of the 5 feet includes a portion of the decking around the pool. And then after that, it's just decking. So one, is there limitations, or should there be limitations on how far that decking goes to the property line? Should that have a setback? 2, is 5 feet sufficient for a pool setback? And then 3, at what height do we start measuring it as a principal structure? We're suggesting 4 feet, but it could be 2, it could be 6, it could be something else.
And this is the to if I have this right, to move back that massive wall that are being put up amongst neighbors.
Well,
now.
it won't affect your side yard, it affects your rear yard. But to that point, you could also add, if you're going to elevate your pool 15 feet, maybe it should have additional side yard setback. We've talked about that, so that's part of the conversation too. Or you just tie it to the structure setback, right? Once it's part of the structure, once it's elevated, it should be the same setback. Whatever we change on the side yard setbacks, it's gonna be subject to those.
Okay.
Okay, so the question is height, that it becomes subject to those.
All right.
Yeah, because if
So
you do a
that's what we're
ground level
answering.
pool, you can have it start 5 feet back, and then if you have it part of your structure, it's 25 feet back, so it moves the whole thing back, which is, otherwise, that pool wouldn't count as anything in your square footage.
And then
If
the
they have it
second
on the
part to that
ground.
is 5 sufficient if it's not elevated?
Is 5 sufficient if it's not elevated? Well, they're everywhere at 5, so I don't know why. Have we seen a problem?
No, I think the biggest problem is probably clarifying the pavers and the decking, right, Sarah, is clarifying, differentiating between a pool that's set back at 5 feet and paves up to the property line, which can create drainage issues.
Well, what my understanding was is if you have a footer, the footer has to be 5 feet back. And if you're just having a wire mesh and whatever, it can go to the property line because it's like a pad.
Right, so that's part of the issue, is the paving up to the property line, and that applies for side or rear yard. So if your pool could be set back 5 feet, but then you've got a 4.5, 5 foot area decking around it, then you're up to the property line.
There's a lot of pools that go out over the seawall.
Go over the seawall?
Up to the seawall and over the
Okay.
seawall, yeah.
And I would, I would say one of the biggest concerns that we have with that is regarding drainage, because you are, you have to change elevation in order to bring in pavers or decking, whatever you're putting in there. And also typically you're not managing that water. It's gonna be flowing onto your neighbor's property and into the canal potentially. And also how do we address the 67% if somebody has come in with a pool and they have the pool and the pool deck permitted, and then they pave everything else around it because they're not counting that as part of the pool deck.
It exists.
Okay, so we're now asking, when does it become part of the principal structure? Back to the original question. I want to
Yes.
kind of break this down, just because
Let's throw
I've
the
got a
4
lot of
four-
blank
4
stares
feet
right
out
now.
there. That's the kind of minimum 4 feet.
We looked at the 4 feet because that's the fence height that you're permitted. So if you're on the water, theoretically, you're not causing any additional visibility barrier if you have a 4-foot pool height. But
Okay.
above that, potentially you're getting above that fence height you're permitted.
And then you're part of the principal structure at that point. Well, kind of have a clear idea what they're saying?
Yes, I agree with that.
So, shall we take a quick poll and agreement?
Just 1 second.
Yeah.
4 feet from what?
Height.
Grade.
Grade. Ground.
Grade.
And what is defined
To
grade
raise a
for?
pool.
Natural grade, the grade of the lot.
So if the lot goes like that.
Would be the grade of the ground floor of the principal structure would also be on grade, presumably.
So, trying to think of the fence example. How would we apply if it had, you don't really have that much of a change in elevation on these lots, but if you do,
In some places, they look at it for stem wall, and that was the language that I included in here regarding stem wall, because theoretically, your stem wall starts at grade and ends at your pool deck. So that would be the highest point. So if your property does drop down, then you have to count that into your consideration.
so I think to your question then, once that stem wall is over 4 feet, no matter what grade it's at, starting from, then it gets counted as a principal.
Define stem wall.
Well, the footer and the basically the retaining wall that's
The
holding.
exposed wall. is
Right,
what you're
the
saying.
exposed wall.
So if I put it up 10 feet and then I come in and I put in a big pile of dirt up there and it's only 3 feet exposed wall, what do you got?
Well, you got a lot of fill that you weren't permitted to do, and we would write you a notice of violation.
I'm just asking. So
Good
to
point.
me,
That's why we say
the
natural
ground
grade
floor
or
of the house,
existing
to
grade.
me,
Yeah.
if it's 5 feet
Ground
above the
level.
ground floor of the house, that's pretty clear.
What we don't want to have happen is additional work, I guess, or filling of the property, and then measuring and manipulating that elevation, because all of it is fill, essentially. So, and then you're raising the elevation
Now,
and,
there's an
blocking the
example of that on
visibility,
Williams.
so in my mind, it was from the existing or natural grade of what the house was at, or the property was at, before permitting.
Yeah.
Because you can't bring in 2 feet of fill without a permit, without showing that, because of drainage issues. So you shouldn't be able to take advantage of that, and that was the whole point, is to not allow somebody to come and bring in 2 feet of fill, and then start to measure their 4 feet, so they can really block out their neighbor. So I guess in a circumstance where you have a very unique lot here, where you have a drop-off like that, it might
Yeah.
be a consideration, but that's why we're just using the natural or existing grade. If we can find out what that is before they put anything on the property.
Okay, so, are we good with what they're saying?
Yes.
Grade level, ground level?
The wording as proposed here is good.
But, Bruce, I think you made a good point there, though. If the 4 feet is measured from the ground level, and the ground level is defined as the ground floor of the principal residence, which normally it would be, on those lots, that if there were a steep decline, you could have a very ugly situation still. You know, if they could build up 4 feet, it could be 10 feet. because if there's a 6-foot slope. So, how do we deal?
But even if they
But
are that way, the
as
neighbor's
he's
going to
pointed
be the
out,
same level too.
That's an unusual situation here.
Very
We,
unusual.
we don't, although on my street, on Randy Lane, there's an 8-foot drop from my swimming pool to the seawall.
Really?
Yes.
Now, is your neighbor's also an 8-foot drop? Is his yard the same slopes?
And because the developer there put a lot of fill on those lots, and they're considerably above the height of the seawall. So if you build your pool
I
out,
never noticed that.
that you'd have a big drop like this.
But this would only be an issue if your neighbor was considerably lower than you too. But if everybody's at that grade level, then it's,
Yeah, that's true. Aesthetically, that's the case, yes.
I think what we're trying to protect against is
Yeah.
substantial change in
Yeah.
height of
Yes.
this. So in
Right.
that case, if pre-development, then they wouldn't be able to do it. It'd be subject to the 25-foot instead of the
Right.
5 feet.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
So is the wrap-up on this issue, these suggested wording?
Yes.
okay. Do we need to take a poll? Should we go around? You good?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Dan, yes?
Yes.
You're good with the changes in the wording? Bruce? Okay, so if I have this correctly for wrap-up, that we are in agreement with the changes that have been suggested to us regarding the elevated pool, swimming pools
On page 28.
on page 28. Do you need us to read it? Okay,
no. We can wordsmith that too, so.
all right. So the next piece, which was brought up also earlier, and this is also, again, a lot of this is all the little issues that have to do with setbacks and such, and also some of the things that we're starting to see out there, and this is the AC and mechanical equipment. We're gonna use a specific, and if you look again back to those 3 houses, they've elevated all their mechanical equipment, they've put it on the side of the house because they can, and it sits right outside the neighbor's bedroom. You know, now they're big enough houses that they have got 3-4 units, and that is an issue of sound. When you're trying to sleep, it has caused other issues. So it has been proposed for us to look at this too as well, to see how we can alleviate some of this issue that is not as prevalent in the existing houses, but they're starting to show up in the new construction as we're getting these much, much larger houses, as to how to handle this. Is it we require some sort of barrier around them, sound barrier around them? Is it that they get moved to a different portion of the house? Am I correct on this, Jason, in our conversations?
Yeah, what was the other thing? I think it's not necessarily the setback, it's probably the amount of units you end up with because of the bigger houses is what I think is ultimately the reason, because they are subject to the setbacks. So the side yard setback that we have, 7.5, that what we're having is a lot of maybe builders that aren't familiar with that quirk in this code. Other codes have an exemption or, relief of 2 or 3 feet of equipment. We don't have that. So they'll design the house and then realize they don't have anywhere to put the AC equipment once the MEP comes in to do the design. So we've had people complaining because they end up with the equipment on their patio, in the back porch, and they don't like that, which I can understand that. It was just bad design.
Is that the same on ground level? You have to.
Well, we don't have, I'm trying to think of circumstance. We should not really have ground level, there should not be any ground level AC for new construction.
Oh, yeah, new construction, right.
So it seems, they're just not measuring, they're not realizing they need an enclave or something cut out of the house or something, which then again creates noise, potential deflection of noise. So you got that issue, but then the other part of it is this, I think the amount of AC equipment that's being put in that generates it, because you have zones and floors and square foot, 5,000 square foot home needs a lot of AC equipment. That's probably the impetus to some of this.
The other issue that we run into has to do with the pool equipment, because they don't, when they're designing the pool area, essentially they want the back of the house to be their patio lanai area. They don't want their pool equipment there. The way the code is written, it can be within the 5-foot rear setback of the building it supports. in this instance, it's not really a building, it's a pool, so where can they put that? What are their options? It needs to be more clear. We need to address pool equipment more clearly in addition to the AC and generators and that type of equipment.
So to Sarah's point, there's actually no reference to AC equipment in the code. It talks,
interesting.
yeah, it talks about an exemption for pool equipment for a rear yard. It talks about mechanical equipment, but it doesn't specifically say AC. So we're looking at maybe splitting those two out a little bit if you want to treat them differently is a big question. And then two, maybe I think what we talked about was requiring them to be split so they're not all loaded up on one side of a house to one neighbor. You know, things of that nature. We can design features we could put in the code as requirements to address that issue if that's an issue you want to address.
You know, I remember when Summer Stockton was on the council, she had an issue with the new house that was built next to hers with the air conditioning units. I don't know what ever happened to resolve it, but I think it was landscaping.
The landscaping, yes.
It was a landscaping buffer. Yeah. I can't. I'm at a loss on this one.
Landscape buffer
I,
when they're second story.
I'm living with that right now, that 3 air conditioning. And if not for the snoring of my mate, it would be those damn air conditioning units keeping me up at night. But
That's gonna go for real
oh,
popular,
no,
just
that's
to
a,
let you know,
that's a
Ray.
personal joke. That's an ongoing thing.
Well,
But,
I'm gonna let Cheryl know that you brought it up.
pardon me?
We might find out. Or in the doghouse.
Touche.
Or in a
touche.
telephone booth.
See what a little bit of levity does to these meetings? Come on now. But I'll give you something to think about, though, and seriously. With the commercial buildings, what we do is we hollow out a little bit of the roof up top, and we put the AC units up there. Now, we've done it in condominiums. I've done it in commercial buildings, small commercial buildings. I mean, that's an alternative. So maybe somewhere along the line with these incentives, I mean, that could be something else to talk about. So it's just a thought.
Can they do that on a house?
You can do it.
Why not?
I mean, you
don't
could
know.
do that, but I've also seen them even on some of these new buildings. There's one in particular as you're driving south. It's on the side of the building. It's on the side of the house.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's unsightly too. So I think we, as smart people, need to figure out what we're going to do with these units to alleviate a definite problem that is increasing in these neighborhoods as our buildings are getting bigger, our houses are getting bigger, and these more and more units. So if you have suggestions, let's start throwing them out, because this is where we kind of are with this, because they're looking for guidance from us. You know, I know in at our house, we've planted, you know, and you do have, you do have to keep so much open space around them, and I can't remember, and I should, I'm in that industry. But we've planted vegetation and other sound barriers around it, so we don't have to listen to it, even in our own house with our own unit, because it sits right outside our bedroom too as well. So, I mean, there is some vegetation issues that we could do. Where do we want to put these units? Where are we going to require them?
I think it's a very real issue. I guess I would just ask staff, are there other surrounding communities that have solved this problem? In other words, do we need to reinvent the wheel?
I've been involved in discussions in other communities where this got tossed around with many, many different ideas. I don't know that anything was decided on in any of them. In almost all the situations, there are options to resolve it, but oftentimes it's not a one-size-fits-all. I think that our code could use a lot of clarity and maybe allowances for different types of structures and where they can be located. But I haven't seen it resolved very well.
Can you have incentives for split systems, possibly?
Well, they're split, they're putting all the equipment together. But, to the earlier point, there's a couple things. One is visibility, so just, do you want them visible or not? Okay, and then the second question is, you want them in the setbacks or not? And I think if you can reach a consensus on those 2 points, staff will have enough chew on to try to put it down on a piece of paper.
Well, I think if you put it in the setback, it's even closer to the neighbors, noise-wise. I can tell you, I don't have a lot of solutions, but I can tell you what I see as part of the problem. We're having people put them, they build this little cave into the side of their house, which actually shoots all the noise out at the neighbor. They don't hear any of it because they're protected on 3 sides from their own pool pump, but it's all shooting right at somebody else's bedroom window. So I think the thing we've got currently in place is really not a good solution. I kind of like Ray's idea of putting the air conditioners on the roof. That doesn't solve the pool pump problem, though. Well, no, they don't have to be on a flat roof. You can have areas built into them. I've seen them before.
Yeah, platform.
Yeah. I would also endorse that we put in something that says that you put noise barriers around them in addition to anything else. There's no reason. It's not expensive to put a noise barrier around them. And any way that we can help deaden that sound, especially in an inexpensive way, I don't see any reason why not, that they shouldn't have to have some kind of sound deadening around all of those kinds of units.
Do we have any code that says they can't have them in the front yard, but landscaped around them?
Well, the code says they can encroach into the rear and water body setbacks. It says mechanical equipment such as air conditioners may encroach up to 3 feet into rear and water body setbacks, but must meet same street and side setbacks as the building it serves. And actually, that's the point I was going to make, just throwing out another thought, saying that, not saying if I agree or disagree, but is that have them where they're either built into the roof or in the rear setback, never in the side setback. That's another idea. And also, I agree with the pool equipment should not be outside the side setbacks. They should have to be in as well.
I agree with that.
I do too.
Do we create some code around sound barrier?
Include, yeah.
So when it says, but must meet the same side, street and side setback, does that mean that the pool equipment cannot be within 7.5 feet of the?
Right, none of the, well, right, so the AC equipment can't be within the 7.5, pool equipment can't be in the 7.5, it's only the rear, well, that's where the pool equipment confusion and the AC confusion is, because your pool equipment is serving a use that's different than your AC unit. So, but yes, the 7.5 side yard setback, they can't put that in there.
But you said that pool equipment isn't currently referenced.
But it
So-
says such as, and
Yeah.
a pool heater is the same thing as an air conditioner.
Well, me too, but
the
they're
question
saying
about the
people
pool
are
equipment
putting them
comes,
in
is it the 5-foot setback because of the pool, or is it the 25-foot setback because of the house? Where does the pool equipment go?
Which setback do you use?
Oh.
And to the side
But
yard.
it says as the building it serves for the
Right, but the-
AC and other mechanical
But the
equipment.
pool doesn't serve a building, so that's what we run into that issue with the pool equipment, because it's serving a pool, it's not serving a building, where the AC is clear on that part of it because it's serving the structure.
We have a
Yeah,
lot of
but-
existing houses that are gonna add pools. Where do you put the AC? I
Right,
mean,
for
for
the pool
the
equipment.
Right.
So the only option for AC
And a
equipment
heater.
is you either have an enclave, or you reduce the footprint of the house in the area, by about 3 feet, and you have basically a 10.5-foot setback for the house to fit, 3 to 4 feet of equipment in there. That's physically the only option you have. Or you could put it in the rear, but then you have patios and pools and other things that people are packing in there, so they don't want the equipment back there.
Well, we ought to come up with some answer for those existing that want pools so that they don't all have to come before the LPA and the town council to put it
Correct.
in.
That was Sarah's point, is clarity on the pool equipment separate from AC equipment would be
Well,
beneficial.
That can be resolved by modifying the language there to define mechanical equipment to include pool equipment. As it says, mechanical equipment such as air conditioners. So this rears the ugly head of inclusio unius as exclusio alterius.
My thoughts exactly.
Yeah.
And
Been waiting.
does that necessarily only mean air conditioners? No, it doesn't exclude everything, but
But he's saying
it
it's
can be
separate.
defined to include. I mean, actually, when I read that, I've always considered pool equipment to be, that's a mechanical equipment, isn't it?
Well, I think
So
the
wha-
hang up is the the building it serves.
Yeah.
It was written for equipment serving the building, AC equipment, with the afterthought of pool equipment
Right.
applies, but it
Yeah,
really doesn't.
but Jason, how does a pool not serve a home? You know, the pool isn't public. The pool's not there just for there. You can't build it on an empty lot. A pool, I think a pool clearly serves a home.
Well, I mean, there's no mechanical or plumbing connection to the
Well,
home.
but that's not what it's saying. We're talking about serving. Maybe serving is something other than mechanical or.
Right.
But it's an argument that can be made, so why don't we clarify it and make it stronger so that people
Yeah.
can't even make the argument?
And also, is 3 feet enough to fit your equipment in? I mean, that's the other part of this. It says 3 feet, and if you want a pool pump, a heater, AC, a
Mine's in line.
generator.
Mine's in line, it fits in 3 feet.
Mine doesn't.
Yours doesn't?
So, I know. So I just had my pool was just finished last year, and that pool equipment is pretty substantial. It's for sure more than 3 feet, the area that it's in. Hmm? Oh, no. It's on the back side of my house, but I think it takes more than 3 feet. I'll measure it when I get home.
But I think if you break it out and have pool equipment versus AC equipment, it has different categories because most homes that are ground level already have an AC, but they're gonna, if they put in a pool, they would have to all come before the LPA and the town council if it had to be incorporated into the house or on the roof. I mean, I can't imagine.
pool equipment?
So
Servicing
the
pool.
the
That's what I'm
reality
saying,
is,
but that's what,
this exemption, I think, is probably fine for pool equipment. It doesn't necessarily work for AC equipment. Nobody wants a big bank of AC units out the back of their sliding
Right.
glass doors on the second deck where maybe where your master bedroom is. The functionality of it doesn't work. What we've seen is the only place that it works is they're trying to put it on the side yard. But again, then it creates the enclave issue. So maybe it's, if you're gonna do the enclave, then there has to be sound buffering or some type of sound shielding in that condition.
And you can do, and I'd say in the code, you directionalize some of that sound. So you can directionalize with your sound barriers where that sound goes to. So you don't necessarily have it going straight out, towards your neighbor. You can have it going front back.
In an unenclosed situation, open on all sides, does anybody here think that the 7.5 is insufficient for, or 10 or whatever it ends up being, insufficient for AC equipment? Or is it because of the directionalization and the enclosing that you're hearing that you have the problems?
I think it's the latter.
Okay. So then it's an option of, you can put it on your side, you can move your building in, and you create the space for this equipment, or you can put it in an enclave and create some kind of buffering or sound attenuation for it.
But we get one shot at this, because once you start doing this, you cannot move equipment once it's in. You can't move once they have it piped in, wired in, and you're not moving that piece of equipment 6 feet this way or 10 feet that way. You can't do it.
I think this is one of those things we need to work with the industry too, frankly, because they're coming in late to the design process on these buildings. It's not their fault, and they're telling the builder, whoever, this isn't working. I don't have room. You've over-designed the footprint of the house. I can't put it on nobody wants it on the porch out back.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know the solutions of how to fix the sound issue. I don't have expertise in that, so we can talk to the industry. Plus access. I see these ladders on the side of the houses. I can't imagine trying to climb up there and do AC repair equipment, or repair the equipment.
Okay.
Well, virtually all, on single-family homes, in what I've observed, the equipment is on the side of the house. And what equipment there can vary considerably. You could have just the pool pump and a small filter, or you could have a huge heat pump, and which can be as big as an air conditioner, so I think it should all be included in the same category. I don't make a distinction between a heat pump and an air conditioner.
They're the
Tell
same
you the
thing.
truth, in terms of the aesthetic standpoint or the noise, but a heat pump's pool equipment, not an air conditioner. So
Can we finish on that point? Because I think you guys made a great point. If it's serving the building, then it's subject to the 25-foot setback. Whereas if it's serving a pool, then potentially it could be subject to and encroach into a 5-foot setback. That's a huge difference in
Yeah.
where we measure. So that's why it's redefining it and making sure that's the location you want it. And that was
Anyone?
to
Because the
Anita's
pool-
point of,
The air conditioning could be cantilevered off of the roof, and the pool equipment couldn't be.
the pool equipment can be, they don't like to because of the size of the pumps you have to do to
Well,
elevate it.
plus how
but-
you gonna put your chlorine tabs into your pool equipment if it's on the roof?
Well, there's a difference between that, your pump and a heat pump. A
Yeah, if
pump,
you had,
the
yeah,
decimals is
if you have solar,
considerably-
solar pump is on the roof, but the heat pump's on the side of the house normally, yeah.
So if it's all treated
Yeah.
the same, and
Yeah.
if it's all subject to the building that it
Right.
serves, then it's only 3 feet into the 25-foot rear setback. Versus what they're doing is they're putting them out by the seawall, they're putting them out by the corner of the lot.
Yeah, so
I wanna make sure-
they're putting them in so that they're meeting the 5-foot setback. They're not adjacent to the house. In a lot of instances, it's very difficult to put all of it, especially if it's an old house with a new pool, putting it within that 3 feet from the house. And the house is already built to the 25-foot setback. So they run into the issue of where can they put it, where does this fit?
So if that's okay, we can move down that path. It's just, it's not necessarily written that way. So I just want to make sure you understand those two differences. Sarah's right, the reality is they're not all going to be pooled together in a pool. They're not going to be banked together all in one area.
Oh, they
Just
could.
Yes.
You know, when we start talking about some of these things, that's part of the problem, is that they're pulling them all together and putting them in one specific spot, and you have the compounded sound going towards. So I could see somebody putting a AC compressor outside next to the heat pump for the pool and putting all the noise creating items together,
They usually are.
and hence we're sitting in the same boat.
They usually are.
It's not an easy solution for this one. But they want direction, so we have to give them direction.
Well, I don't think 3 feet is large enough to be realistic about what the size of AHCs are today. So I think we have to change that anyway if we're going to.
Remember,
allow it
that's
there.
the encroachment into the setback. Is it?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that's the
Oh.
minimum, that's the
I get it.
allowance of being able to
Okay,
get
okay.
into the setback.
Okay.
So I think there's two things. Can we get direction on your accepting of pools, equipment, or other equipment being in the rear yard setback?
Or do we define it even more as in the heat, because what we're really talking about is the heat pump. The heat pump's loud.
Mine's not.
There's a,
Mine wasn't either.
Mine sounds like a fan.
I mean, you can tell when it
Mine
goes
sounds
on,
like
but
an
it
Just
doesn't.
an
also
AC
go do more
compressor.
research.
Oh, no.
I don't know. I really don't know, honestly. There's no easy answer.
I think the suggestion of looking at what other cities do, we'll just bring you,
Some ideas.
we'll just bring you, here's what Lighthouse,
okay.
X, Y, and Z does. This is a starting point, see if any of those make you feel comfortable.
I'm just glad you're all as stumped as we are.
I sent a request to Bonita Springs asking them what they do with their air conditioners too.
I don't think anybody
know.
knows what to do with them, frankly.
I know.
All right, so if I'm wrapping this back up, the town is going to bring us a couple ideas from other locales.
check the immediate vicinity for what they're doing. Let you start from there.
Okay. Are we good with that?
Yep.
All right. Well, it's 1:15, 1:17. We've made it through our agenda. All right, so,
I have a question
yes.
that I would like to see come back to us, because we discussed the pre-disaster build back somehow going away in the future. And I have a perfect example of something that will eliminate somebody being able to build it off. And I don't understand your response to it, that the pre-disaster build back is not applicable in a single-family residence.
Pre-disaster build-back is to protect non-conforming density. So when you have multiple units, you have more units than what's be allowed today on that property. That's what pre-disaster build-back is to preserve and protect.
Well, my understanding
It has
was.
nothing to do, single-family properties, if you're gonna tear down, you're gonna add to it, they're subject to setbacks and regulations. Just like, so in addition, you can't add an addition onto a house and violate the setbacks. You
Well,
can- I'm sorry.
but my example is, this is a house with a lot on it, a family in it, and they're 46 by 50. They can't meet a 25-foot setback in the front and a 20 in the back, because that's their whole lot. So this could not be built if they couldn't use a pre-disaster build-back and build to the footprint. That's why I was very
And
strong
they wouldn't
about
use a
footprint.
pre-disaster build-out because they're not protecting density. They have a right to a dwelling unit on that property. The question is which setbacks apply. So they can do an addition, build up or out, consistent with today's setbacks, or tear down and build consistent with today's setbacks. But if you can add on to a structure that does not meet the setbacks, but the addition has to meet the setbacks. So yes, it does limit where and how they could add on to it. Like they wouldn't be able to do a full second story, right? Because part of that second story would not meet current setbacks. But the pre-disaster build-back is strictly to protect
But
density
you said
and
if they
rent.
tear it down, they'd have to meet current setbacks,
Yes.
so they couldn't build a house there.
Well, you said 46 by,
50.
well, I think we need to talk about that property and whether that lot qualifies
I
as
know.
a development to begin with.
Yeah.
frankly.
But the one
That's-
next door to it is the same way.
If
So
this
I
was
am-
specific to the pre-disaster,
But
more
the-
to the pre-disaster build-back, then yes, this would be more, because we all discussed it. But this is more along the lines of whether or not he has the right to build on that or not build on that two code once he decides to tear it down. That's between you two. So,
There's lots of houses that are.
Before you adjourn, there has been a desire on the part of some members of this group to have quarterly meetings with the LPA and the town council. If that's the case, the next one would be in July. However, these bodies don't meet in July, so August the 13th. If it's the will of this group to schedule a joint session for that date, I would appreciate you letting me know.
I'm in favor.
Well, the only
say
thing is that August 13th is, everybody will have just come back from a long break. Do you really,
our agendas may be long.
well, I'm just, or will you, I'm just saying. It's-
Say 3 times.
Just because we take off doesn't mean that Sarah and Jason have taken off, and
Yeah.
they might
Well,
have
no, I'm
lots
more
of good stuff for us
Yeah,
to
but
look
it's
at.
I'm
the
more
LPA.
concerned the LPA agenda will be quite long that day, and this meeting won't even start till 2 o'clock.
We
Well,
could,
then
we could
set
go
it
to
on
a
a separate
different
day.
day.
Yeah.
We could go to the 20th, for example.
And just make it the September meeting.
Yeah,
I'd say September meeting.
I don't think we have to be
Yeah.
restricted to a exact quarter.
So
You
September
know,
10th?
that's,
I will not be here September.
But I think you were
But
one
that
of the
doesn't mean you
people,
can't do it.
you were one of the people earlier who said we needed to address some of these things as soon as possible.
yeah,
So
I
I hate
do.
to put it off yet another month.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the things
just-
that there are consensus on are just gonna flow through the LPA and town council for approval. It's just the ones that there are not consensus on that would have to be kicked around somewhere here in the workshop.
Well, we went a year last year.
2 years.
So if we, 2 years. So if we did 2 or 3 times a year, that would be
A marked
3
improvement over.
times what we did in the last 2 years.
I think
And I must
these
say
meetings are
that
important.
LPA is supposed to request when
We
they
do,
want
but
them.
we
So-
don't get on the agenda. We do request them. You were there, you requested them too when you were
All right.
Okay,
So-
we're going around in circles. August 20th?
August 20th, I can't make that, driving a kid to college.
Yeah, well, instead, how about instead of we punching, well, we can, I guess that makes more sense.
I thought we were moving.
I
to
kind of like
September.
Roger's suggestion of moving it to September 10th.
I'm fine with September 10th.
September 10th works for me.
Okay.
Good with
Well, are
10th?
you going?
Oh, but he's
Oh,
not here.
To the conference?
Wait a minute, wait a minute. They've got something going on.
So unfortunately, the second week of September is the state planning conference.
Okay.
And being the chair of our local section.
Yep.
And I think Sarah wants to go, so.
Could
I don't
we,
mean to-
How about
you
the
do?
17th of September?
Doesn't mean you all can't meet.
could we do
No, your
a,
input's invaluable. You
What's
have to be-
MP date in September?
Nice try, Jason.
September council meeting dates have not yet been set because of the budget
Do you have
adoption.
the MP date
Yeah, that would,
for September?
that would be the 5th.
What's the
January.
August MP
it would
date?
be it would be the 5th,
Could the LPA members make? the
can make
5th of
September 5th.
September 5?
That's Labor Day weekend, isn't it?
September 5,
That's Labor Day weekend.
yep, but September
The
5.
Thursday
week
before.
after, yeah.
I'm good for that.
So we'll work out the details.
September 5.
It's the Thursday before.
I
Thursday
want to
after.
excuse the absence because I'm not going to be here.
What day of the week is that?
It's a
Thursday.
Thursday.
It's the Thursday after Labor Day.
Thursday?
So your council meeting will be the 3rd.
No, we don't have it set yet because of the budget.
It's budget.
Oh, that's right, that's right.
All right, so tentatively set for the 5th.
I'll be here.
and we'll go, move forward from there.
What time?
Are you good? All right.
What time?
What time? Is after your MMP or before?
Well, yeah, it'll be after MP. We'll get a note out how long we think that schedule, you know, we don't want to try to keep you sitting here waiting for the MMP to end, so we'll look at the agenda and give you our best guess when the joint session will start. I'm assuming about midday, 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock or something like that.
Do I have to do a motion to adjourn? Oh, okay.
They're popped.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Sorry, Roxanne. That's quite all right.
Oh, Keith.